In the second video for 7.6, we're actually just going to do a quick review of the Pythagorean theorem and a couple examples of using that. As you might recall, the Pythagorean theorem actually has to do with right triangles. So if I draw a right triangle right here, the 90-degree angle forms, and you have a leg and a leg and a hypotenuse. What the Pythagorean theorem states is that I can take one of the legs, we'll label that A, another leg, which we'll label B, and another leg, and the hypotenuse, and label it as C. And they actually, the lengths can be written as a formula, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So, leg squared plus leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. So, if you have 2 out of the 3 lengths of a triangle, you should be able to figure out the third missing one based on that formula. So, if we have an example like this and we are given a triangle, and we know that the hypotenuse is 9 centimeters, and we know that one of the legs is 6 centimeters, again, the leg is formed next to the right triangle, you can basically plug it into the Pythagorean theorem. The only stipulation is that the 9 always has to be the hypotenuse always has to be the C. This doesn't matter whether it's A or B. We'll label this as A for right now. So if A squared plus 6 squared equals 9 squared. And then you're just solving. So A squared plus 36 equals 81. A squared equals 45. And I take the square root to get rid of the square. So I get A equals plus or minus, because we're actually taking the square root of a square, so there's 2 options. Square root of 45, which is really square root of 9 times 5, which is 3 square root of 5. Now, because this is a length of a triangle, it can't be negative, so the actual length will be 3 square root of 5 centimeters. Now, this is actually an exact value. You can always use your calculator to round to the nearest decimal if that's what it calls for. One more example for you. Let's say that a furniture upholsterer wishes to cut a strip from a piece of fabric that is 45 inches by 45 inches. The strip must be cut on the bias of the fabric. Basically what that means is the diagonal. What is the longest strip that can be cut? Find an exact answer and then round that to a 2 decimal approximation. So what happens is we have this piece of fabric, okay, it's 45 by 45. And what he wants to do is he wants to cut on the bias, and what I mentioned is that's the diagonal right here. So because this is a square, it's 45 by 45, that's a 90-degree angle. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that diagonal, which is really the hypotenuse. So since I'm trying to find that, we can label it as x. I am using a Pythagorean theorem, which says I'm squaring the legs and setting it equal to the hypotenuse squared. So we're going to go ahead and calculate that. It gives me 2,025 plus 2,025, which is 4,050. Take the square root of both sides. Now, a lot of you probably won't know 4,050 and what's the square root. So you can always kind of go back to your basics. I know 25 can go in there. It can go in 162 times. I can know that 81 can go in there twice. So there's 9, there's 5, and 2 can't do anything. So 45 square root of 2. Another way to think about this is really 2 times 45 squared. So that's kind of how you can kind of figure that number out as well. So there's your exact answer. If we were to use a calculator to find the approximation, it would be 63.64